Have you ever made a simple, quiet decision only to look back and realize it changed everything? That's how this story begins. Not with headlines or heroes, but with a mechanic, near a snowstorm, and a knock on a shed door in the middle of the night. It's a story about kindness that didn't ask for anything in return, about trust when there was no reason to give it, and about what happens when two lives, each broken in their own way, collide in the most unexpected corner of the world. But don't be fooled by how gently it begins, because what unfolds will challenge what you believe about second chances and the quiet power of simply doing what's right. Before we dive in, if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, stories that heal, uplift, and linger long after they end, consider subscribing to our channel. It helps us bring more light into a world that needs it. Now take a deep breath. Let me tell you what happened when a poor mechanic let a stranger sleep in his shed. Poor mechanic let a stranger sleep in his shed. The next morning, 12 SUVs surrounded his home. The wind howled through the cracks of the tin roof like an old ghost trying to come home. Outside, the snow fell in thick, silent sheets, covering the gravel driveway and bearing the rusty pickup that hadn't moved in weeks. Jack Miller sat in the far corner of his garage-turned-living room, hunched over a bowl of canned chili, his hands still stained with grease. The heat from the wood stove barely reached his boots. Montana winters weren't kind, but Jack didn't mind the quiet. He preferred engines to people. Machines didn't lie, didn't leave. They just needed the right parts and a steady hand, unlike his past. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud, not the kind of knock meant to disturb. It was hesitant, almost embarrassed, like someone knocking not to ask, but to apologize for asking. Jack stood still, listening. Another gust of wind, then nothing. He set the bowl down, slowly stepped toward the back window that looked out over the shed. Movement. He grabbed the flashlight from the tool bench, pulled on his coat, and stepped outside into the cold. The shed sat a few yards from the garage, an old structure used to store parts he never organized. Its door was slightly ajar. Jack approached cautiously. He wasn't paranoid, just practiced. Out here, people didn't show up without a reason, and when they did, it was rarely good. "Hello," he called out. No answer. He pushed the door open with his boot and aimed the flashlight inside. That's when he saw her. A woman, mid-30s maybe, drenched in snow hair tangled beneath a knit beanie coat zipped to her chin. Her cheeks were flushed raw from the cold, and her eyes were wide with something between fear and exhaustion. "I'm sorry," she said, voice shaking. "I didn't mean to trespass. I needed somewhere dry, just for the night." Jack didn't move for a second. She wasn't holding anything but a small black backpack clutched tight to her chest. No threat, no bravado, just desperation wearing the face of someone who hadn't slept in days. He lowered the flashlight. "You shouldn't be out in this," he said. "It's 18 degrees and dropping." "I didn't have a choice." Jack glanced at the frigid wind swirling behind her, then stepped aside. "I've got an old cot and a space heater. It's not much, but better than freezing in here." She blinked. "You're serious? I don't make jokes in a blizzard." He led her toward the garage, unlocked the side door, and let her in. The room was cluttered but warm. A half-rebuilt carburetor lay in pieces on the table next to a plate of toast. Jack turned the heater higher and pointed to a folded cot in the corner. "You can sleep here. Bathroom's through that door. You need food." She hesitated, then nodded. He handed her a bowl of chili and a worn towel. She murmured a thank you so soft he barely heard it, then sank onto the cot with a kind of silent collapse. Jack didn't ask questions. Not yet. He wasn't in the business of interrogating people life had already cornered. Instead, he poured another cup of coffee and went back to his bench. For a while, there was only the sound of the wind, the soft clink of metal tools, and her quiet spooning of soup. It wasn't until the fire burned low that she spoke again. "My name's Ellie," she said quietly. Jack looked up. He nodded. "Jack, I didn't mean to scare you. I've been walking for hours. My phone's dead. My ride." She trailed off. "Let's just say I got left behind." Jack leaned back. "That backpack looks heavy." She clutched it a little tighter. "Just stuff I need to keep safe." Jack didn't press. "You can rest here tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out your next step." Ellie looked around, her gaze softening for the first time. "Why are you helping me?" He paused. Because it's cold, he said simply. And you knocked. She stared at him for a long moment, then whispered, most people would have turned me away. Jack gave a wry smile. Most people aren't me. He went to stoke the fire, and behind him she finally laid down on the cot, backpack still wrapped in her arms. She didn't let it out of her sight. That night Jack slept only lightly. Not because he feared for his safety, but because something about the girl didn't quite fit. Her boots were expensive but scuffed. Her jacket insulated and high-end had the tag cut off. And that backpack, it wasn't the kind you took camping. It was the kind tech guys carried into secure rooms. Still, he said nothing. Sometimes the best way to learn someone's story was just to wait. The next morning before dawn, Jack stepped out to fetch firewood and stopped cold. A long line of SUVs, matte black and silent, curved down the snowy road and came to a halt outside his garage. 12 of them. No logos, no license plates, engines still running. Jack squinted through the snow as doors opened in near unison. Men in suits stepped out, no uniforms, no weapons visible, but with the unmistakable coordination of trained professionals. One man in a charcoal gray coat stepped forward, looking at Jack with a calm that felt entirely rehearsed. "Mr. Miller," he said. Jack didn't respond. "We're looking for someone, a woman, traveling alone. She may have passed through here last night." Jack kept his hands in his coat pockets. His jaw tightened. "Lot of women in Montana," he said. The man smiled politely. "This one's different." From behind the frosted window, Ellie was watching, and in that exact moment, Jack knew two things. One, this woman was far more than she'd let on, and two, he was already in it, whether he liked it or not. Snow crunched beneath polished soles as the man in the gray coat stepped closer to Jack's garage. Behind him, the other vehicles idled in eerie synchronization, their tinted windows reflecting the early morning light like the surface of a black lake. Jack didn't move from the porch. The man spoke with an air of calm authority, his voice low but deliberate. "We're not here to cause trouble, Mr. Miller. We're just trying to ensure someone's safety." Jack's eyes didn't waver. "Seems like a lot of cars for one person." The man smiled politely as if acknowledging a clever remark. "Elena Ward, traveling alone, petite, dark hair. She may have come this way." Jack felt the weight of her name drop like a wrench in his gut. Elena Ward. The name was familiar, faint headlines from years ago. Something about a sudden resignation, a family empire, and then silence. "She might be in danger," the man added, voice dipped in concern. "She hasn't been well." Inside, behind the small window near the cot, Jack knew Elena was listening. He could feel her presence pressing against the air just behind the cracked drywall. Jack gave a slow shrug. Didn't see anyone. The man's smile didn't change. He reached into his coat, not suddenly, but with the kind of control that said, "I've done this before," and handed Jack a card. "Just in case. If she shows up, call that number. 24 hours a day. We'd appreciate it." Jack took the card without looking. "Not much happens up here." "That's the impression we got." The man replied, his tone softening into something vaguely condescending. He nodded once, turned back to the caravan, and with a subtle hand gesture, the entire line of SUVs reversed and turned in perfect sequence, like a fleet of shadows fading into the snow. When the last car disappeared beyond the bend, Jack closed the door quietly, locking it behind him. Ellie was standing just a few feet away, her face pale, fingers clenched around the straps of her backpack. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I didn't mean to bring them here." "Who are they?" Jack asked. She looked down. "They're not government, if that's what you're thinking. They're from the Ward Foundation's legal protection team. At least that's what the business cards usually say." "You said your name was Ellie." "It is. Ellie Ward." Jack didn't say anything. He just walked to the stove, poured himself a cup of coffee, and stared out the window. The snow had started again, this time finer, quieter. Finally, he said, "Why are they looking for you like you stole a nuclear code?" Ellie let out a shaky laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Because I stole something worse from them, and I didn't steal it to sell or to ruin anyone. I just took back the truth." Jack turned. "They think I'm unstable," she continued, "that I had a breakdown. It's what the press release said. One morning I woke up and my email access was revoked. My badge didn't work. They issued a statement that I was on medical leave. 2 weeks later, they replaced me on the board. You were on the board of WardCorps, Jack asked, incredulous. I was the CTO, she said, Chief Technology Officer, until I realized they were hiding things. Structurally, systemically. Not small mistakes, Jack. Whole systems of obfuscation layered across shell companies and false audits. I tried to stop it. He frowned. Then why not go to the press or the SEC? Because I needed proof. Real proof. The kind they can't scrub. And by the time I had it, I'd already been flagged as unreliable. Discredited internally. Legally gagged. Even my own name in the system is now marked with a diagnostic code, mental instability. That was their failsafe. Jack leaned back, studying her carefully. And what's in the backpack? She stepped forward, slowly unzipped the top, and pulled out a small black case the size of a paperback novel. She opened it, revealing a custom-built external drive surrounded by insulated foam. Along the edges were scribbled notes in tiny perfect handwriting, an encryption key, a hash code, timestamps. This contains a full immutable audit trail of internal transaction logs from WardCorps' private blockchain. It proves that assets marked for a nonprofit education fund were rerouted into offshore holdings. Over $500 million. This was the last version of the code before they rewrote the audit layer. Jack whistled low. You weren't kidding. I didn't know where else to go. I had no one left to trust. And then last night I saw your light. He looked at her, unsure whether to feel honored or trapped. I'm not asking you to save me, Ellie said. I'm just asking you to let me stay until I figure out my next move. I can be gone in a day. Jack was quiet for a long time. He thought about the men in suits, the kind of people who use silence like a weapon. He thought about the look in Ellie's eyes when she said, I just took back the truth. He didn't know much about blockchains or shell companies, but he did know something about people who disappeared, who were erased not because they were wrong, but because they were inconvenient. He set his coffee down. You can stay. 1 day. 2 if we get snowed in. Ellie gave a small, tired nod. But Jack added, if we're going to do this, we need to be smart. No phones, no online activity, and you show me everything in that drive. She hesitated, then handed it over. Jack placed the case on his workbench like a sacred object. He didn't know yet what doors it would open or close, but he had the sudden, unmistakable feeling that the snowstorm outside had nothing on the one about to come. Jack sat at his workbench, the cold metal edge pressing into his forearms as he examined the drive Ellie had handed him. The black casing was matte custom-built, something more at home in a secure server farm than in a mechanic's garage. His fingers hovered over the latch, not out of fear, but out of respect. He'd worked with secure systems years ago, back when his days were filled with circuit boards and airlocked labs, not oil pans and socket wrenches. He recognized the craftsmanship, the intention behind it. This was built by someone who didn't want it found, he murmured. Ellie, now wrapped in one of his thick flannel shirts, leaned against the doorway, between the small kitchenette and the workshop, holding a mug of lukewarm tea. Her face was drawn but steady. She'd stopped shaking at least. It's air-gapped, she said. The files are layered under a disguised directory. The encryption requires biometric pairing my thumbprint. I used my own build of a privacy-focused OS. You'll need to boot it from the USB key in my backpack. Jack raised an eyebrow, impressed despite himself. Most people carry sandwiches in their backpack, he muttered. Ellie gave a weak laugh. Sandwiches don't get subpoenas. Jack inserted the drive into the rigged-up workstation he kept for diagnostics, an old ThinkPad he'd rebuilt and reprogrammed to run as lean as possible. He plugged in Ellie's OS key and booted to a sterile, minimalist interface. No internet, no tracking, just raw access. A biometric prompt appeared on the screen. Ellie stepped forward, placed her thumb on the sensor. The screen blinked, then bloomed. Lines of code, directories nested inside directories. File names that meant nothing to a layman, but everything to someone who understood back-end systems, auth, ARP, pay, DSB, or CryptoBot, X5, FundShift, Mirror, Ledger, V7 Doc, Proofs, Exec, Lock. Jack whistled softly. I haven't seen logs structured like this since the aerospace contracts. I modeled them after that architecture, Ellie said. It's one of the few formats they never fully deprecated. Most of it's self-documenting. He opened a file and scanned through its contents. At first glance, it was a maze of hashes, transaction IDs, internal timestamps. But as he read, a pattern emerged. One transaction every week, always after 2 a.m. EST, always involving the same three shell accounts, and always just under the reporting threshold for auto-flagging. Jack sat back. They funneled the money slowly. Not in big chunks, but drips automated, hidden among legitimate disbursements. Ellie nodded. The platform was originally designed for transparency, smart auditing, immutability. But someone built a shadow layer. I think it started as a stress test, but it was never removed, just hidden. Jack stared at the screen. Who else knows about this? I told two people, she said. One was a data compliance officer. He resigned a week after I showed him a sample. The other was my father. Jack looked up. The founder, Ellie, nodded. He wanted to take it public. But 3 weeks later, he announced a sabbatical and moved to Europe. We haven't spoken since. The name Ward now rang louder in Jack's mind. Jonathan Ward, founder of Ward Core, hailed as a pioneer of ethical fintech. A man who championed financial literacy, transparency, and the decentralization of power. Then out of nowhere, he left it all behind. What happened? Jack asked. Ellie lowered her gaze. He didn't want the fight. Or maybe he just didn't want the fall. I don't blame him, really. But I couldn't walk away. The wind outside rose, again rattling the panes. Jack stood and poured another cup of coffee, offering one to her. You know what this means, he said. Even if we prove the transactions are real, they'll claim they were authorized. Without the right metadata, they'll say you forged it. You've already been labeled mentally unfit, right? Ellie sipped. Yes, quietly, internally. Which means I can't testify without triggering a credibility hearing. Jack leaned against the counter. His mind was ticking now, not like a mechanic, but like the systems engineer he used to be. Like someone who designed frameworks to survive failure. Redundancy, verification. You said this is only part of it. What else is out there? Ellie hesitated. The second half of the audit keys kept offline, physically separated. My father's idea, a legacy system for accountability. They're stored on a private server tied to a librarian's credentials in Boulder. That's where the full reconstruction becomes indisputable. Jack raised an eyebrow. Boulder? That's 8 hours south, Ellie set her mug down. I can get there if I avoid airports and major highways. I just need a few more days. I need this to be airtight before I release anything. Otherwise, they'll bury it again. Or me. He didn't ask what she meant by bury. He understood figuratively, legally, reputationally, and quietly. Jack looked at the drive again, the numbers pulsing across the screen like a heartbeat. Truth alive and encrypted. You're not going alone, he said at last. Ellie blinked. You don't have to. I do, Jack interrupted. I've spent a decade hiding from the world, thinking what I knew didn't matter anymore. But this is the kind of thing that breaks cycles. He picked up the drive and carefully closed the case. Besides, he added, glancing around the cluttered garage, it's not every day a poor mechanic gets to outrun a trillion-dollar corporation with a CTO in flannel pajamas. Ellie laughed softly. Then her face turned serious again. Thank you, Jack, for believing me. Jack met her eyes. Don't thank me yet, he said. We've got a long road and a lot of data between us and the truth. Outside, the snow kept falling soft and undisturbed. But inside, something had shifted. This wasn't just about hiding anymore. It was about building a case that couldn't be denied. And Jack Miller, reluctant, solitary, quietly brilliant Jack, was back in the game. The following morning brought a tentative stillness. The snow had stopped sometime before dawn, laying a pristine white hush over the world. The trees stood like quiet sentinels outside Jack's garage, their branches heavy with the weight of the storm. Inside, however, a different kind of storm was just beginning. Jack sat on an overturned crate sipping black coffee from a chipped enamel mug. Across from him, Ellie stood over the workbench, watching the boot screen of the ThinkPad like it might turn into a courtroom. They hadn't spoken much since last night, not from awkwardness but from the weight of knowing too much too soon. Trust wasn't a word either of them used lightly. Now Ellie broke the silence. You said you used to work in aerospace systems. Jack gave a slow nod. 15 years ago. Back when people still believed in high-integrity firewalls and clean rooms. I was part of the embedded systems division for Aerotrace. Ellie tilted her head. That's the company that developed the avionics OS for civilian aircraft, right? Yep, in the fail-safe encryption for black box telemetry. She blinked. So you weren't just a systems guy. You wrote part of the national flight architecture. Jack shrugged, uncomfortable. That was another life. Ellie sat down slowly. Why'd you leave? Jack stared into his coffee for a long moment. The air between them shifted. There was a data misread. At least that's what the official report said. An anomaly in sensor fusion. A crash. 14 people died. Turned out the data hadn't been lost, it was overwritten. Someone had run a stress test protocol live without tagging it. We built the protocol, but we weren't told it would be used. I pushed for transparency. They pushed me out. Quietly, cleanly. He paused, then added, they offered me a settlement. I took a one-way ticket out of the industry instead. Ellie didn't speak. She didn't have to. There was a kind of respect that came from silence, the kind that acknowledged battle scars without asking to see them. Jack set his mug down. That's why I recognized your logs. They were built to be honest. Auditable. That kind of architecture doesn't come from corporate strategy. It comes from someone trying to protect truth from being buried. Ellie exhaled. That's what I wanted. But they turned it into something else. They made it just transparent enough to impress investors and just flexible enough to manipulate from within. Jack nodded slowly, his expression hardening. You designed the truth, and they gave it a face that lied. She looked down, her fingers brushing against the edge of the workbench. I just wanted to build something that couldn't be corrupted. But I didn't anticipate what they'd do with the backdoors I left for updates for debugging. They exploited the same tools I made to fix problems. Jack stood and began pacing his mind, working through the problem, the way he once disassembled engines by feel, by instinct, by pattern recognition. Okay, he said finally. Let's assume you recover the second half of the audit logs in Boulder. That gives you what, a mirrored view of the fund movements, Ellie nodded. A complete view, transactional integrity, hash verification from both ends. With that, we can show not only where the money went, but that the audit records were falsified after the fact. But even with all that Jack said, how do you prove it wasn't you who manipulated the system? You were the CTO. You had access. You had keys. Ellie hesitated. I don't, she admitted. Not alone. Jack stopped pacing. But if the rebuild is conducted by someone else, she continued, someone with expertise and no stake in the outcome, the data will stand. The metadata will confirm creation dates, edit timestamps, source MAC addresses. None of it matches my devices. I've preserved the digital chain of custody. Jack nodded. And who do you trust to do the rebuild? Ellie looked up at him. You. The word hung in the air like an exposed wire. Jack chuckled, shaking his head. Ellie, I rebuild carburetors and patch diesel generators with paper clips and old faith. I haven't run a forensic chain since they shut down my clearance. But you're the only one who understands the layers beneath, she said softly. You see the design. You understand what integrity used to mean before everything got optimized for speed and stock value. You see what I tried to do? Jack ran a hand through his hair, then sighed. I'm not that man anymore. But you were. A long beat passed. He looked at the laptop, still humming quietly, patiently, waiting for its next command. The blinking cursor seemed to beckon him like an old friend. All right, he said finally. We'll go to Boulder. But we can't just walk in and download data from a private server without raising red flags. Ellie stood. I still have the login credentials. I never revoked them. The librarian hosting the node was my father's friend. He set it up as part of a pilot program with an academic archive. It's not on any commercial grid. Jack raised an eyebrow. You're telling me the final piece of a billion-dollar fraud case is hidden on a back-end university mirror server in Colorado under the guise of a research node? She smiled faintly. Welcome to American innovation. Jack sighed. All right, we'll leave tonight. My truck's too old to track. We'll take the back roads, stay off the main line. If they're watching traffic flow, we can't leave a digital trail. He walked to the corner and pulled a large duffel from under a bench, tossing it onto the cot. He began packing tools, batteries, 2 old burner laptops, a bag of zip ties, and a laminated road atlas so worn it looked like parchment. Ellie watched him with a mixture of disbelief and admiration. You had all this ready, Jack gave a tired half smile. You'd be surprised what you hold on to when you stop expecting the world to make sense. He paused, looking at her. You really sure about this? She didn't blink. I have to be. It's not just about the money. It's about the idea that systems can still work, that truth can still matter, even if it's inconvenient. Jack looked out the window. The sky was clearing, light bleeding slowly across the frozen landscape. He zipped the duffel shut. Then let's go find the rest of the truth, he said. The late afternoon sun broke through the Montana sky in fractured streaks of gold, melting the edges of the snowbanks that lined the two-lane highway. Jack's old Chevy truck rumbled steadily southbound, its engine grumbling like an old dog that hadn't been walked in months, but still remembered the route. The heater worked when it wanted to, and the radio had long since given up, replaced by a soft, humming sound Ellie made when the silence grew too loud. They hadn't spoken much in the first few hours, not out of distance, but focus. Jack was driving with the precision of someone who knew that the road might be the safest place or the most watched. No GPS, no Bluetooth, phones off, batteries pulled. Ellie had even covered her smartwatch with 2 layers of foil and stashed it in the glove compartment. Jack had laughed when she did it, but not because it was overkill, because it meant she understood what they were up against. Where'd you learn to secure a drive like that? He finally asked, breaking the silence. Ellie looked out at the rolling white hills, her eyes distant. From my father. Jack raised an eyebrow. Before WarCorps, he worked in secure logistics. Built early encryption standards for financial records. He didn't trust the cloud, didn't trust wireless anything. He used to make me practice encrypting letters on paper before I was allowed to use a computer. Jack chuckled. My dad made me rebuild lawnmowers before I was allowed to touch the truck. Sounds like we both grew up under security protocols, she said softly. They stopped for gas just past the Wyoming border, an old station with rusting pumps and a clerk who looked like he'd been there since Carter was president. Jack paid in cash, nodded politely, and checked the tires, while Ellie ran inside for coffee. They didn't linger. Every minute they were visible was a minute catalog somewhere. Back on the road, Ellie turned to Jack, holding 2 steaming styrofoam cups. So how does a guy go from designing aerospace systems to rebuilding snowmobiles and drinking gas station coffee? Jack sipped the bitter brew, eyes on the road. You ever put everything into something you believed would make a difference, only to watch it get sold, gutted, and repurposed into something it was never meant to be? Ellie didn't answer. I built a protocol, Jack said after a pause. Redundant safety logic for avionics. It was supposed to guarantee a failover, even in the rarest anomalies. They liked it until they realized how much bandwidth it took. So they optimized it, pulled half the checks, said it was over-engineered. He paused. The version they used, my version, wasn't mine anymore. She didn't ask what happened next, she didn't have to. Instead, she said, that's why you recognize my audit logs. They follow the same principles. Integrity over efficiency, Jack said. Yeah, I saw it the second the data booted. The miles passed. The sky dimmed to blue charcoal, and the headlights cut twin paths through the dusk. Just north of Fort Collins, Jack turned off the main road, taking a narrow pass that wound through the foothills. You sure about this librarian, he asked? Ellie nodded. Yes. His name is Dr. Nathaniel Griggs. He was my father's closest friend in the early days, back when they were building open-source encryption frameworks. The archive node is housed under the university's Special Collections Wing. It's part of a test bed for academic data sovereignty. Off-grid, offline, no wireless relay. Jack smirked. Sounds like my kind of place. But Ellie's brow furrowed. He hasn't answered any of my messages in months. I just hope he's still there. Still himself. Jack nodded. We'll find out soon enough. They arrived in Boulder well after dark. The city lay quiet under a pale sky, the streets dusted with frost. Jack parked 3 blocks from the university entrance in a residential zone with no cameras. They walked the rest of the way in silence, duffel bags slung over Jack's shoulder, Ellie clutching her backpack like it was her last connection to the world she once knew. Campus was nearly deserted. Finals had ended weeks ago and the winter break left the halls eerily empty. They slipped in through a side door. Ellie had access to an alumni passcode still active after all this time. That fact alone made Jack nervous. The Special Collections Wing sat in the far corner of the library's lowest level. It was more vault than archive with temperature-controlled rooms and old-school punch locks. They passed shelves of hand-bound manuscripts and decommissioned servers stacked like ancient fossils. The smell of dust and solder filled the air. Ellie led him to a locked glass room tucked behind a row of microfilm scanners. Inside, an aging man in a wool vest sat at a desk covered in circuit diagrams and archival binders. He looked up as they entered. "Elena," his voice was warm, uncertain. "I was beginning to think I imagined you." "Hi, Nate," she said quietly. Dr. Griggs stood a little shakily and embraced her like one might a ghost. "I kept the node running," he said, "like he asked me to. Didn't know if you'd ever come back." Jack stood by the door watching. "Who's he?" Nate asked, giving Jack a once-over. Jack gave a small wave. "I'm the guy with the clean system who knows how to speak your language." Griggs smiled faintly. "Good, because you're going to need it." He turned back to Ellie. "They came last month, said it was an audit, took backups, said you were unstable. I didn't believe them, but I couldn't risk pushing back." Ellie's face fell. "They know about the node," Griggs nodded slowly, "but they don't know it still exists." Jack stepped forward. "Then we need to act fast. We brought the partial logs. We need the mirrored ledger and the metadata from your last node sync. Full reconstruction." Griggs blinked, then smiled wider than he had all night. "Then let's light the damn thing up." He turned to the far wall, flipped two ancient-looking switches, and an entire rack of servers whirred to life with the soft hum of something old, powerful, and forgotten. Jack looked at Ellie. "You ready?" She nodded. "I've been waiting for this for 2 years." The low hum of the server rack was oddly comforting, like the murmur of a trusted confidant, too old to speak, but too loyal to forget. Jack stood with his arms crossed, eyes narrowing as the status lights blinked to life in rows of green and amber. To anyone else, it would have looked like a collection of outdated equipment, but to him it was beautiful, deliberate analog untouched by the cloud. "System's been idle for 74 days, Doctor," Griggs said, reading the terminal like a seasoned conductor preparing an orchestra. "No incoming packets, no updates, but the core directory is intact." He tapped a few keys with steady fingers. "Pulling up the ward node. Let's see what they didn't erase." Ellie stood beside Jack, her arms folded tightly, her expression somewhere between dread and hope. "Will it recognize the data change?" she asked. "It should," Nate replied. "Your father built the synchronization algorithm off your original metadata map, and you never revoked the pairing, right?" She shook her head. "I couldn't. It was never technically mine. The node was always designated under his legacy access protocol." "Then we're good." He pressed enter. Lines of code scrolled rapidly across the screen. Directory maps, sync attempts, logs. Then, like a breath held too long, the system paused before flashing a single line of confirmation. "Ward node. Replication. Found sync available." Jack leaned forward. "We're in." Ellie's breath caught. "Download everything. Full environment. Don't just pull the files, image the whole disk." "Already on it," Jack said, stepping forward and plugging in the backup drive they'd brought from Montana. "If we're going to validate these logs in court or in front of anyone who matters, we need provenance. Untouched block-level snapshots." He moved like a surgeon now, each keystroke measured, each folder verified. What he found confirmed what Ellie had told him, the mirrored ledger hashed against time-stamped entries from the original blockchain entries that no longer existed in the public ledger. But here in this old server with peeling labels and analog fans, the truth had been waiting. As the data transfer ticked past 28%, a soft ping interrupted the silence. Jack's head snapped toward the terminal. "What was that?" Ellie asked. Dr. Griggs frowned. "System alert. External ping detected. Not intrusion, just a handshake request." "Could be an automated query," Jack muttered, but he was already moving. He yanked a cable from the wall, severing any live connections. "No sense taking chances," he said. "Air gap the rest manually." "Wait," Ellie said, staring at the logs that had appeared on screen moments before he disconnected. "That handshake. It's coming from inside WardCore's remote auditing division." Griggs swore under his breath. "They're pinging legacy nodes, looking for data ghosts. They might not know this one's still alive, but they're sweeping." Jack exhaled. which means we've got maybe 30 minutes before someone notices the delay or the anomaly. Griggs nodded. Less if they're proactive. Keep the node offline, Jack said, and clone the contents to both drives. We can't take chances. If we lose even a byte of metadata, this all becomes speculative again. Ellie's voice was steady now. This is enough, isn't it? This validates everything. Jack nodded slowly. This confirms the fund transfers were rerouted. It shows the original audit logs were overwritten and when. It also proves the decision trails came from identities with elevated access. Not yours. She looked down at the drive. So why doesn't it feel like we've won? Jack hesitated. Because we haven't yet. Ellie turned to Griggs. Nathaniel, do you still have access to the internal communication logs, the unarchived ones from the Foundation's planning board? His eyebrows lifted. Technically, yes. They were mirrored here for compliance purposes. It was part of your father's transparency initiative. The board voted to shut it down, but they never formally removed the redundancy. It's buried. Can you pull them? She asked, her voice tight. I need to know something. Jack glanced at her. Ellie, we've already got the ledger. What else? But she didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the screen. Dr. Griggs nodded and opened a hidden partition. A simple directory, no encryption, just an archaic naming system that hadn't been touched in 2 years. They searched for 15 minutes. Then Jack stopped cold. Here. He clicked open a file labeled Intcom Exec Meeting, Transcript 5/12/23. TXT. The contents weren't long. A transcript. A closed-door meeting. Ellie's name appeared 4 times. Jack's eyes skimmed the lines, then stopped. Read this, he said, voice low. Exec 1. If she keeps pressing for a forensic review, we can't just delay her again. Exec 2. We use the Tier 3 flag. Mental health protocol, it's in the bylaws. Exec 1, she's the founder's daughter. Exec 3, exactly. If she goes public, it'll look like a family feud. No one will believe she's objective. Exec 2, run the Tier 3, lock credentials, isolate her. Exec 1, Jonathan won't like this. Exec 3, he already signed off. Silence. Ellie's hand trembled against the desk. Jack didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Ellie stepped back as if the room had tilted. Her father's name, his signature. It wasn't just the system that betrayed her. It was blood. Jack reached out instinctively, steadying her by the arm. She blinked, cleared her throat, and straightened her shoulders. I needed to see that she whispered. Ellie, no. I needed to know how far they went, and how far he let them. Griggs quietly handed her the drive. Jack looked at her, something deeper settling in his voice. This doesn't just expose the financial truth anymore. This is a roadmap of everything they used to erase you. She nodded slowly. And now I'm going to use it to rebuild myself. The mountain road back out of Boulder twisted like a thread pulled taut through time. Jack's truck roared against the inclined tires, crunching over hardened snow. In the back seat, 2 identical external drives lay cushioned in foam and wrapped in thick canvas. Within them pulsed the data Ellie had risked everything to recover, proof of betrayal, of corruption, and perhaps most bitterly of consent. Ellie sat in the passenger seat watching the trees blur past. She hadn't spoken in over an hour. Jack stole a glance at her. Her posture was straight, shoulders squared, but her hands were clenched in her lap like she was holding something invisible together. You okay? He asked. She blinked slowly as if returning from somewhere far off. No, she said quietly. But I will be. They drove on. The plan was clear: get back to Montana, where Jack's garage, disconnected and unsuspicious, could serve as their processing center. From there, they'd rebuild the audit trail on clean hardware and begin preparing a package for external release. They needed a platform to publish the findings, a legal team to shield Ellie, and above all, a strategy to control the narrative. But narratives weren't easy to control, and especially when no one wanted to hear them. They stopped for food in a nowhere town, 1 diner, 1 gas station, and a blinking motel sign that hadn't worked since the 90s. Jack ordered black coffee and eggs. Ellie picked at dry toast. You said you tried to reach out before, Jack said. To the press, she nodded, barely tasting her food. 3 different outlets. 2 never responded. The 3rd ran a piece saying I was experiencing post-traumatic stress following a disruptive exit from WardCorps. It was buried under a sponsored article about blockchain in the wine industry. Jack stirred his coffee slowly. You think they were paid off, not directly. Just nudged. Media's like infrastructure. Doesn't take much to redirect it, just a few levers in the right hands. Half the reporters I spoke to were investors. The other half didn't understand the data. Jack leaned back, eyes narrowing. We need someone who does. Ellie looked up. You have someone in mind, I might. Back in his aerospace days, Jack had worked briefly with a systems compliance officer named Ava Mitchell, a bulldog with a legal degree and an engineer's brain. After leaving the corporate world, she'd become a digital transparency advocate, operating a nonprofit watchdog group called Ledgerlight, small, underfunded, but stubborn as hell. She's the kind of person who doesn't take bribes, Jack said, because she knows no one can afford her silence. Does she know you? She knew who I was before I disappeared. Ellie met his eyes. Then let's find her. Jack nodded, pulled out the diner's ancient payphone directory, and after a few dead ends found a mailing box in Portland tied to Ledgerlight. No direct number, no office address, just a website with a .org domain and a contact form guarded by CAPTCHAs. She doesn't want to be found easily, Ellie said, watching him work. That's how you know she's legit, Jack replied. They sent a message, need verification on critical audit trail, high integrity data, names involved, willing to provide proof of source, digital chain of custody, and cross-verified metadata. This is not a leak, it's a ledger. Jack left only a burner number 1 that pinged through a privacy server located in Iceland. Then they waited. 2 days. Silence. Then just before dawn on the third morning, the phone buzzed once, then again. A text appeared, secure line. 15 mins. Answer. Jack glanced at Ellie. It's her. They answered in the truck, parked in a forest, pull-off snow falling in soft curtains around them. A voice came through, low, calm, and precise. You're Jack Miller. Yes. And you're with Elena Ward. Yes. Pause. I've been waiting for this call for 2 years, Ava said. Your files just lit up on a few dormant networks. Jack frowned. I thought you were off the grid. I am, but some of my systems aren't. You hit a hash match. I've been listening for it ever since WardCorp's Tier 3 flag was used without a medical review. Ellie leaned in. You knew I suspected, Ava said, but suspicions don't change institutions. Data does. Jack got to the point. We have the full trail, original ledger, mirrored sync, metadata intact, names, dates, access logs. Ava didn't hesitate. Then I'm flying to you. We're off grid, not for long. I'll bring a clean terminal and legal counsel. Don't move, don't share. And for God's sake, don't try to leak it online. You'll lose control in the first 20 minutes. Ellie asked, can you help us release this properly? I can help the truth defend itself, Ava replied. That's what matters now. The call ended. Jack turned to Ellie. She's in. Ellie closed her eyes, took a breath that went deeper than anything she'd drawn since this began. But when she opened them again, there was a question still lingering behind her calm. What if? People don't care, she whispered. Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the glove compartment and pulled out an old photo, creased and faded. A young girl, maybe 8, sitting on the hood of a tractor, her cheeks smudged with grease. Jack beside her, beaming with the kind of pride that life hadn't taken from him yet. My daughter used to ask why people lie, he said quietly. I never had a good answer, but I told her the truth doesn't disappear just because no one's listening. Ellie stared at the picture. What happened to her? She and her mom left. Safer that way. They still send letters sometimes. He tucked the photo away. Point is, we tell the truth anyway, even if it doesn't trend, even if it doesn't win awards, because someday someone will need to hear it, and they'll know where to find it. Ellie didn't speak, but her hand found his on the console between them, and for a moment neither of them felt quite so alone. The snow was still falling when Ava Mitchell arrived, though arrived didn't quite capture the way she materialized. No headlights, no sound. Just a hybrid SUV rolling up the gravel path behind Jack's garage like it had been part of the mountain all along. She stepped out in a long charcoal coat, glasses, fogged slightly from the temperature change, a black briefcase in one hand, and a military-grade laptop bag in the other. Her gray hair was tied back in a loose knot, and her expression was the kind that didn't waste time on greetings. "You must be Jack," she said. Jack nodded. "That's me." Ava's eyes slid past him, landing on Ellie, who stood by the garage door, shoulders squared like she was bracing for impact. "And you," Ava said. "You're the storm they tried to bury." Ellie didn't flinch. "Still here." Ava gave a faint smile, one of approval, not comfort. "Let's get to work." They convened in Jack's garage, now scrubbed clean and reconfigured into a makeshift lab. The air smelled faintly of motor oil and pine, but the hum of new equipment quickly took over Ava's portable terminal. 2 portable servers and a biometric authentication reader she'd set up within minutes of arrival. Ellie laid out the drives, carefully sealed and labeled. Jack had already isolated the network. No routers, no Wi-Fi, only hardwired air-gap systems running on battery backups. "This is more secure than most of what I've seen in federal labs," Ava murmured. "Old habits," Jack said, "and a healthy distrust of modern convenience." Ava powered on her system and plugged in the primary drive. Her fingers danced across the keys with a fluency only years of paranoia and practice could teach. "Tell me what I'm looking at," she said. Ellie stepped forward, her voice measured. "This is the mirrored audit ledger from WardCore's original transparency platform before the architecture was rewritten. It contains a complete record of financial movements from 3 core accounts designated for charitable foundations." Ava's eyes narrowed. "And those funds were rerouted?" "Yes," Ellie said, "into private shell holdings with no direct disclosures. The manipulation occurred through internal permission overrides and hidden flags inside the audit layer flags I helped build." "Under pressure?" Ava asked. Ellie paused. "Under loyalty." "At first." Ava nodded, satisfied. "And the Tier 3 designation, we recovered transcripts," Jack said, stepping in. "Board-level discussion to discredit Ellie using internal health codes. Her access was revoked. Medical leave filed. No diagnosis ever given." Ava's fingers froze for a fraction of a second. Classic pre-litigation sterilization. Seen it before. Hard to fight, but traceable. She pulled up a subdirectory and opened a document Jack hadn't accessed yet. A compressed XML file labeled NT Sec Protocol 23 Override. "What's this?" Ava asked, typing rapidly. Ellie leaned forward, eyes widening. "That shouldn't be here," explained Jack said. "It's a top-level permission grant," she whispered. "One-time use, written manually. Used to override encryption keys and redirect ledger mirroring to a decoy server. Only one person could generate that key." "Your replacement?" Jack asked. "No," Ellie said, voice hollow. "My father." Ava looked up. "Your father signed the override." Ellie nodded slowly. "That's his biometric hash, his key signature, which means he knew. Maybe even before I was removed." The silence was sharp. Jack's face tightened, but Ava's didn't change. She'd seen too many betrayals, too many fathers who chose silence over scandal. "I can work with this," she said, "because now we don't just have financial data. We have intent." "But will anyone believe it?" Ellie asked. "They already painted me as unstable. Just because we have the proof doesn't mean people will want to see it." "That's where the strategy comes in," Ava said, her voice growing colder, more precise. "You're not going to walk into a courtroom and declare war. You're going to offer a controlled leak. Not to media, not to bloggers, but to the one place that still deals in consequences, the investors." Jack leaned forward. "You want to weaponize shareholder accountability?" Ava nodded. "WardCore is still public, still beholden to SEC regulations and market ethics policies. If we release the data to the major equity stakeholders with proof of mismanagement, the board will collapse in on itself before it can mount a defense. They'll protect their money before they protect their reputation." Ellie said nothing, but Jack could see it in her face, an internal battle between vindication and grief. This wasn't the kind of justice she'd imagined. It was quiet, corporate, bloodless, but real. Ava turned to her briefcase and pulled out a stack of pre-drafted NDAs, a sealed legal binder, and a set of contact cards. "We'll need one last thing," she said. "A statement from you, Ellie. Written, calm, precise. No accusations, no emotion. Just a record. You're not the enemy here. You're the whistleblower. They'll want to paint you as vengeful. Don't give them anything they can twist. Ellie took a breath, then nodded. I'll write it tonight, good Ava said, because tomorrow this goes to the equity board of Vanguard Capital. Jack blinked. That's one of their biggest investors. Exactly. They have a zero-tolerance policy on undisclosed financial risk. If they see this coming and aren't prepared, they'll tank the stock themselves to salvage control. That's your opening. Jack leaned back, processing. You've done this before. Ava's face softened just slightly. Too many times. That night, the garage stayed lit until almost 3 in the morning. Jack brewed strong coffee in an old steel pot. Ellie sat hunched over her keyboard, every word in her statement measured like it might be held against her, which it might. Ava worked with surgical efficiency, preparing data packages, building encrypted links to be sent only when a specific time trigger was activated. They weren't just preparing to reveal the truth. They were preparing to release it in a way that couldn't be ignored. And somewhere around the 4th hour, Ellie looked up from her screen and said almost to herself, I used to think justice came from courts, but now I think maybe it comes from people who refuse to stay quiet. Jack didn't say anything. He just reached over, slid her a fresh mug of coffee, and went back to work beside her shoulder to shoulder in the silence that follows awakening. The upload began at 6:04 a.m., not to the media, not to a public server, but to a vaulted investor relations platform with multi-tiered encryption accessed only by high-net-worth institutional stakeholders. Ava had timed it perfectly, targeting the start of the business day on the East Coast. The payload was silent. Just one message attached to a clean metadata chain and a read-only report, material discrepancies in WardCore charitable fund audits, with full ledger reconstruction and cross-verified forensic trail. Please review prior to quarterly stakeholder call. Attached a compressed file labeled Transparency Ledger.v1. From the outside, nothing happened. But inside the global financial network, ripples began. Jack stood by the garage window, cradling his coffee, watching dawn push against the snowy treetops. Ellie sat behind him, staring at her laptop as if it might blink back. Ava paced a few feet away, phone in one hand, earpiece in the other, murmuring legal phrases like forced disclosure, threshold, and statutory notice period. You think they'll act? Ellie finally asked. Ava paused her call and turned. They'll act, she said. They won't have a choice. These aren't journalists we're talking to. They're stewards of money. They can ignore a story, but not a risk. Jack stepped closer. What about legal retaliation? Cease and desist. They won't do it yet, Ava said. Not until they know what else you have. And that uncertainty is our shield. Ellie nodded slowly, but Jack saw it. Her hands were trembling. You okay? He asked gently. She tried to smile, but it wavered. This is the part I didn't plan for. The waiting. Jack offered his mug. Coffee doesn't help, but it makes the shaking feel like someone else's problem. She took the mug with a grateful laugh. Then Ava's phone buzzed. She answered, listening for no more than 10 seconds before saying, Put it through. She looked up at Jack and Ellie. That was fast. On speaker, a clipped voice crackled through. Male, authoritative, slightly impatient. Ms. Mitchell, this is Daniel Trent from Vanguard Risk Division. We've received your submission. Our forensic team has verified the integrity of the files. We need to confirm, is this a sanctioned whistleblower action or a hostile disclosure? Ava replied calmly, This is a formal whistleblower disclosure under 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 15-114 with digital chain of custody intact. My client is available for closed session testimony should the board require it. There was a pause on the line. Understood. I'll convene with the Executive Risk Committee immediately. Click. Ava looked at Ellie. We just moved from speculation to strategy. The next ripple came less than 2 hours later. WardCore stock dipped, not by much, but enough to register on automated trading systems. Volume spiked. Analysts flagged internal instability rumors. No articles ran, no headlines broke, but within private investor channels, questions started leaking. Why was Vanguard reviewing WardCore? Who authorized the audit? Why wasn't the board informed? Then came the silencing attempts, subtle, indirect, but unmistakable. Jack's truck, parked at the edge of his lot, was visited by 2 men in suits who claimed to be surveyors from the county. When questioned, they left without explanation. Ellie's old phone, which had been powered off and stashed in a lead-lined case, lit up with 5 missed calls from a blocked number and a single text that read, Come home. You've made your point. Ava dismissed it immediately. That's not an olive branch. It's a rope disguised as rescue. But Jack noticed Ellie's reaction, not fear, but a kind of hollow sadness, like the last shard of her former life had just dissolved. You can stop now, Jack said softly. No one would blame you. Ellie looked at him, and for a long moment the world outside seemed far away. I can't, she said, because now it's not just about me. That evening, just as the sun began to set behind the Montana pines, a storm moved in, not the weather kind, but something subtler, more charged. An email arrived from WardCorps' general counsel. It was precisely worded, polished by multiple hands, and sent with the subject line, Request for Reconciliation Discussion. Ellie read it aloud. We acknowledge recent circulation of data connected to Miss Elena Ward and former internal systems. In the interest of constructive resolution, our executive team invites Ms. Ward to a private roundtable discussion to address potential misinterpretations and align on factual clarification. This is not a legal proceeding, and any information exchange will remain confidential under mutual NDA. Jack scoffed. Translation. We're scared, but not enough to admit it. Ava was already replying. We'll agree to a recorded session with third-party observers. No NDA, no off-record discussions. If they refuse, it's proof they never intended transparency. She hit send without waiting. Then came the third ripple. A message forwarded through Ava's encrypted relay, an unsigned internal memo from within the company, sent anonymously. The kind of thing no one wants to leak, but someone finally does. It read, per legal guidance, prepare for phased leadership reassignment in Q1. If requested, all executive team members should be prepared to confirm non-involvement with charitable fund audit procedures. Reinforce internal silence protocols. Media response should center on legacy systems issues and forthcoming transparency reforms. Do not acknowledge whistleblower status until further notice. Jack let out a long breath. They're unraveling. Ellie said nothing. She just closed her eyes for a long moment. Then she asked Ava, do you think they'll actually admit it? Publicly, Ava shook her head. Not unless they're forced to. But it doesn't matter. The moment investors lose confidence, truth becomes self-enforcing. They'll clean house to stabilize stock. Your job wasn't to bring down the castle, it was to show the cracks. Ellie turned to Jack. What happens next? He looked at her with quiet admiration. You go from surviving to leading. And just like that, for the first time since she stepped into his shed, that frozen night, Ellie Ward straightened her spine, not with defiance, but with purpose. I'm ready. At precisely 9:00 a.m. Eastern Time, WardCorps' board released an official statement. It was 3 paragraphs long, carefully vetted, and full of the kind of language that meant everything and nothing at once. Following an internal review, WardCorps acknowledges discrepancies in the historical ledger logs of select philanthropic allocations. As part of our commitment to transparency, we are launching a full third-party forensic audit. While we cannot comment on individual personnel matters, we remain aligned with the values of our founder, Jonathan Ward, and will pursue all necessary actions to rebuild trust. It was, as Ava predicted, an admission wrapped in insulation. But the signal was clear. They had no defense left that wouldn't cost more than surrender. Across the country, in boardrooms and strategy calls, the quiet panic began. Investors demanded emergency meetings. Internal teams scrambled to revise contingency plans. Half the executive board went silent. The other half started updating LinkedIn profiles. And at the center of it all, a woman once labeled unstable had become the only voice worth listening to. Inside Jack's garage-turned-war room, the atmosphere was part exhaustion, part disbelief. Ava read the statement out loud, then leaned back, folding her arms. They blinked. Jack exhaled. It's not an apology. It's better, Ava said. It's exposure. Now every journalist, regulator, and institutional watchdog has a reason to dig. And WardCorps just invited them in. Ellie didn't speak. She stood by the open door, letting the cold air sweep in across the floor. The snow outside had melted in patches, revealing gravel beneath a metaphor she didn't miss. What now? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Ava looked over. Now you decide who you want to be in the aftermath. By midday, her inbox was full. 2 national newspapers, a producer from a major streaming platform, a former mentor she hadn't heard from in 5 years, and most notably a message forwarded through Ava from WardCorps' interim chairwoman. It was short and shockingly direct. Ms. Ward, I understand your reservations, but I believe the best way forward is through reform, not scorched earth. The board will meet in private session next week. I would like to extend an invitation for you to participate on record on principle and in purpose. If you're willing to return not as a subordinate, but as a stakeholder in rebuilding, we are ready to listen. Jack stared at the message and frowned. That sounds dangerously reasonable. Ellie read it 3 times. They're not offering me a role. They're offering me responsibility. Ava nodded. That's how they rebuild the brand, with the person they tried to erase. Jack turned to Ellie. You thinking about it? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped outside. The Montana air was crisp, the sun cold but bright. Ellie stood by the edge of the gravel path where it met the woods and watched the wind dance through the pines. Jack followed a few moments later, his boots crunching beside her. You don't have to go back, he said gently. I know. They'll want to use your name, your image, your silence, maybe even your guilt. She smiled faintly. I know that too, but you're considering it. She looked at him. Not because I want to be part of the machine, but because I helped build it. And maybe I'm the only one left who remembers what it was supposed to be. Jack studied her face, no fear, no bitterness, just clarity, purpose shaped by wounds that had been cleaned, not hidden. You're not the same woman who knocked on my shed in the snow. No, she said. She didn't know yet what she was made of. They returned inside. Ava had already drafted a response. I am willing to participate in the upcoming session. I will do so not as a passive observer, but as a principled voice advocating for systemic accountability and transparent reform. I will not sign retroactive NDAs. I will not contribute to whitewashed history. I will, however, work to ensure that WardCorps becomes what it claimed to be, a place where technology serves truth, not silence. Ellie read it, then added one line. If you can accept that, then we can begin again. That evening, they sat around the wood stove in silence, a rare stillness settling over the garage. You think they'll listen to you? Jack asked. They might. And if they don't? She turned to him, the firelight flickering in her eyes. Then I'll build something better. He smiled, and for a long moment they just sat there, not as mechanic and whistleblower, not as fugitives or saviors, but simply as 2 people who had carried each other through a storm and come out standing. Later, Jack unfolded the envelope Ellie had placed on his workbench, a quiet gesture from earlier that day. Inside was a check, no name, no memo line, just a number written in ink. He stared at it, stunned. Ellie, he called out. She looked up from her laptop. I can't take this. It's not for you, she said. It's for the garage, for the people who'll come here needing a place to start over. Jack looked at her. You mean, turn this into something? She nodded. You fixed more than machines here. You fixed me. Now maybe it's time this place did that for others. Jack didn't reply. He didn't have to, because in that moment he knew exactly what he'd build next. The conference room on the 43rd floor of the WardCorps Tower was nothing like Ellie remembered. Gone were the sleek LED panels, the ambient soundscapes, the hand-polished marble. This version was sterile, stripped-down functional, a temporary space repurposed after the executive suite had been quietly shuttered for renovations. No more over-designed statements of power, only folding chairs, neutral walls, and a projection screen already glowing with the company's new emblem, a simplified logo surrounded by the words, Reform Committee, Phase 1. Ellie stood just outside the glass doors, watching her reflection as much as the people inside. She wore a navy blazer borrowed and a white blouse she'd ironed that morning in Jack's garage, sleeves rolled up slightly. No makeup, no pretense, just clarity. Ava stepped up beside her tablet in hand earpiece in place. They'll open with formal acknowledgement, Ava said, then a statement of intent. Then they'll offer you the floor. They want contrition, not accountability, Ellie said. Then give them, neither Ava replied. Give them conviction. Inside, the board members were gathering. Some familiar faces, people she once called colleagues, mentors. Others were new, recently installed, likely at the insistence of major stakeholders demanding reform. Ellie took one breath, then walked in. The room quieted immediately. Back in Montana, Jack stood in his garage, now partially cleared of engine parts, repainted and reorganized. Two young men, both in their early 20s, were bent over a cracked laptop on a folding table. Another girl, barely 18, soldered a tiny board under a desk lamp. They weren't mechanics. Not yet. But they were learning. Behind them, the wall bore a freshly mounted sign, laser-cut steel on reclaimed wood, second circuit repair. Rethink. Rebuild. The name had been Ellie's idea. Jack had laughed at first. It sounds like a superhero lair, he'd said. She smiled. Or a second chance. The grant Ellie had left behind had transformed Jack's quiet haven into something else, a community tech lab, a teaching space, a place where discarded machines and lost ambition found new alignment. Kids who dropped out, veterans with nothing to return to, even retirees trying to stay sharp. Jack walked past the soldering station, offering a quick word of advice. "Clean the tip, Jenna. Let the iron do the work." She looked up, nodded, then grinned. "Yes, sir," he returned the smile. Somewhere deep inside, something softened a part of him that had stayed rusted for years, now turning smooth again. In the Ward Corps conference room, Ellie stood at the head of the table. The interim chairwoman, a composed woman named Vera Sanjani, gave a short introduction, acknowledging Ellie's previous role and the courage it took to return. Ellie listened without reaction. Then the floor was hers. She stepped forward, unplugged the waiting laptop from the projector, and instead pulled a printed stack of papers from her bag. "I'm not here to share slides," she said. "You've seen the data. You know what happened." The room shifted, chairs creaked. "I'm here to talk about what allowed it to happen." She walked slowly along the side of the table. Ward Corps was built on a promise that technology would serve people, not manipulate them. But somewhere along the way, efficiency outran ethics. Profit silenced protocol. And people like me who raise flags were told we were disruptive to morale. She looked around the room, holding each gaze a second longer than comfortable. Some of you enabled it, others stayed silent. A few of you weren't even here yet, but now you carry the responsibility of cleaning up the legacy you inherited. A man near the end of the table cleared his throat. "With respect, Ms. Ward, our investors expect measurable outcomes. The board is prepared to discuss options, perhaps even a formal reinstatement, if your goals align with." "I'm not here for a title," Ellie said sharply. "I'm here to ensure what happened doesn't happen again." Silence. She laid a copy of her audit reconstruction on the table. "This isn't a weapon, it's a mirror. It shows where the code broke, where the oversight vanished, and where people chose convenience over courage." Another pause. Then Vera leaned forward. "What do you propose?" Ellie straightened. "Three things. First, every internal audit and donation above $1 million from the last 10 years must be re-verified by an external independent agency." No one spoke. Second, the Tier 3 employee review system must be abolished. Today. No more weaponizing health protocols. Eyes dropped to the table. And third, you publish a full record of all charity fund transfers, past and present, including the ones that didn't meet your PR metrics. Not because you're forced to, but because transparency means nothing if it's only turned on when it benefits you. There was no applause, no cheers, but no objections either. Finally, Vera said quietly, "Will you help oversee the implementation?" Ellie looked around. Not at the power, not at the apology, but at the possibility. "I'll advise," she said, "but I won't stay inside the machine." 2 days later, an open letter from Ellie was published on Ward Corps' homepage, then syndicated to over 100 platforms. The truth doesn't belong to corporations or shareholders. It belongs to the people who live in the systems we build. If we cannot hold ourselves accountable, someone else will. I hope this time we choose to be better. That night back in Montana, Jack found her on the porch of the garage. She sat wrapped in a flannel blanket, watching the kids inside the lab work late into the night. "Good day," he asked, handing her a mug of hot cider. Ellie nodded. Hard, but right. Jack sat beside her. "You going back?" She shook her head. "No, I'm moving forward. There's a difference." Jack smiled. "Yeah, there is." They sat together in silence, two souls once derailed by systems too big to fight, now part of something smaller, quieter but more honest. A place rebuilt not with capital, but with courage. And this time the lights inside the garage weren't just for repairs. They were for restoration. Winter faded slowly in Montana. The snow didn't vanish all at once. It receded inch by inch in trickles and thaw lines, giving way to patches of earth and stubborn crocuses that insisted on blooming through the cold. Life has always returned quietly. So did the rhythm of the garage. But it wasn't just a garage anymore. The sign above the door still read Second Circuit, though now it hung against a newly built awning. Inside, the space pulsed with quiet activity. Young adults hunched over stripped-down laptops. Two older veterans reassembling the logic board of an old 3D printer. A teenager explaining blockchain concepts to a retired electrician. Every table was full, every project humming with a sense of forward motion. Jack Miller stood near the front arms, crossed a smudge of grease on his cheek, and the kind of peace in his chest he hadn't felt in decades. He hadn't just fixed a space. He'd helped create a second chance for everyone who stepped through those doors, including himself. The national headlines had moved on, as they always do. WardCorp's internal restructuring made waves for a few weeks. A few board members resigned. A high-profile investor called for ethical reinvention. An op-ed praised the company for its willingness to embrace uncomfortable truths. But most people never read the full story. They didn't need to, because it wasn't about headlines anymore. It was about what remained. Ellie Ward didn't return to the company. She didn't write a memoir or give interviews. She quietly launched a foundation focused on digital accountability and open-source education. Her name became associated not with scandal, but with clarity and a kind of courage not built on confrontation, but compassion. She didn't speak much about what happened in those final board meetings. Only that she'd said what needed saying and walked away on her own terms. One Friday morning, weeks after the last patch of snow melted, Ellie returned to Montana. No press, no escort, just a suitcase, a USB drive in her pocket, and a scarf wrapped around her neck. She found Jack in the garage, helping a young woman install a CPU into a hand-built frame. "You've turned into a teacher," she said from the doorway. Jack turned. His face lit up, not with surprise, but with quiet gladness. "I just hand them the right wrench." She stepped inside, letting the familiar scent of warm solder and pine dust settle around her. "They listen to you," she said. "They don't listen," Jack replied. "They trust." "That's better." He led her outside to the porch where 2 mugs of coffee steamed beside an old wooden bench. They sat like they had months before, when the world was still unraveling, and neither of them had known what lay ahead. Now there was time for reflection, for quiet, for gratitude. "I went back," Ellie said, sipping her coffee. "To see my father." Jack turned to listening. "He's not sick, just old in ways I didn't see before. Tired. I think part of him hoped I wouldn't come. Not out of shame, but out of fear that I'd ask him why." "Did you?" "No, I didn't need to anymore." Jack nodded slowly. Sometimes the answer's in the silence. They sat for a while, watching the sun melt against the treetops. Behind them, laughter echoed from the garage. Someone had powered up an old console, and a new generation was discovering pixelated adventure. Ellie smiled at the sound. "It's strange," she said. "Everything I thought I'd lost wasn't gone. It was just waiting for me to become someone who could carry it better." Jack looked at her, then not as the lost woman who had once appeared on his snowy doorstep, but as someone whole, someone strong, not because she had avoided the fire, but because she had walked through it. "You didn't just carry it," he said. "You gave it shape." She turned to him. "And you, Jack Miller, gave me a place to start again." He looked down, almost bashful. "I didn't do much. Just open the shed." "No," Ellie said. "You opened a door the world had slammed shut on me." Later that day, as the sun began to dip below the ridge, Jack handed her a set of keys. "What's this?" she asked. "The back room's finished. I figured you might want to run your foundation from here, when you're in town." Ellie looked down at the keys, then at him. "You're giving me part of the garage," No, Jack said with a small smile. "I'm just giving you a place to leave the light on." She closed her fingers around the keys. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was returning somewhere. She felt like she was home. That night, they left the doors open. The warm glow from inside spilled out into the darkening pines. There were no speeches, no ceremony, just people learning, laughing, building. And 2 figures on the porch, quietly watching the future they had helped shape. The world didn't change in a day, But in one corner of it, a mechanic's kindness and a whistleblower's courage had rewritten what was possible, not with noise, but with resolve, with truth, with the simple, radical power of saying, "You matter. You are not lost. There's still a place for you here." And sometimes that's where the light settles, right where the broken things begin to heal. Before you go, we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. We read every one, and it means so much to feel connected with listeners from all over the globe. And if this story touched you, if it reminded you that small acts of kindness can lead to something far greater, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's the best way to support us and to make sure you never miss another story that might move you, surprise you, or stay with you. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for spending time with us today. We hope this story left something warm in yours. Until next time, take care, stay kind, and keep believing in the quiet miracles all around us.